"I speak 10 languages," the young woman declared, her hands cuffed. The judge burst out laughing. "Right, and I'm a polyglot," he sneered, facing the entire court. But when she opened her mouth, his laughter froze. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice had never been so packed. Every seat occupied, people standing against the walls, journalists with cameras off, waiting for the exact moment to capture the day's news. The collective murmur created a symphony of expectation that made the old courthouse's air conditioning hum. Emily Davies walked towards the stand, her hands cuffed. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence that fell when bailiff Mark Peterson shouted, "All rise! Court is now in session." Everyone stood as Judge Evelyn Carter entered through the side door, carrying a messy stack of documents. She was a woman of robust build, with perfectly coiffed gray hair swept back, and the kind of expression that only years of sentencing others can sculpt onto a face. A mix of boredom, superiority, and occasional disdain. "You may be seated," Carter ordered, dropping the documents onto her desk with a dry thud that startled several present. Emily remained standing between two bailiffs with Sarah Jenkins, her public defender, at her left. Sarah was a middle-aged woman carrying the weight of too many cases and too little budget. She had pronounced dark circles under her eyes and that barely perceptible tremor in her hands that betrays excessive caffeine and lack of sleep. "Case number 47B, 2024, announced the court clerk. "The Crown versus Emily Davies, charges, wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated scam." The murmur returned to the room like a wave. Emily felt hundreds of eyes piercing her back, judging her before any evidence was presented. She knew that feeling. She had felt it all her life. Crown Prosecutor David Miller rose with theatrical movements, adjusting his tie as if he were an actor on opening night. He was a slender man with sharp features who spoke with that privileged accent that immediately establishes hierarchies in any room. "Your Honor," Miller began with a resonant voice, "we have before us a young woman who has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court has ever seen. For months, Miss Davies posed as a certified translator, offering services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and even government agencies." He paused dramatically, walking slowly in front of the jury. "She collected thousands of dollars for translations she allegedly performed in 10 different languages." 10, Your Honor. But the reality is that this young woman barely finished high school and has no certification, no degree, no credentials to support her supposed linguistic ability. Miller turned towards Emily with a smile that was meant to be compassionate but oozed condescension. "We understand that economic necessity can lead people to make wrong decisions, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the circumstances." Emily clenched her fists inside the handcuffs. Every word from the prosecutor was like a hammer blow to her dignity, not because they were true, but because no one seemed interested in hearing her side. Judge Carter glanced through the documents with a bored expression, as if this were just another case on her endless list of judicial responsibilities. She yawned without bothering to cover her mouth. "Does the defense have anything to say before we proceed?" she asked in a monotonous tone, without even looking up from the papers. Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat. Her hands trembled as she held her worn notepad. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The charges presented are based on misunderstandings and lack of communication with her employers. Miss Davies is willing to demonstrate that she possesses the abilities she claims to have." "Demonstrate?" Carter finally looked up, her eyebrows arching with mocking interest. "And how exactly do you plan to prove she speaks 10 languages? Are you going to sing us a song in each one?" Some nervous laughter rippled through the public. The judge smiled, pleased with her own humor. "Your Honor, with due respect." Sarah tried to continue, but Carter interrupted her with a wave of her hand. "Miss Jenkins, I've reviewed this case. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in a low-income neighborhood and, according to records, worked cleaning offices before this alleged translation business." She looked directly at Emily. "There's no record of higher education, no international certification, nothing to suggest this young woman could speak even 3 languages, much less 10. It was then that Emily raised her head. Her eyes, which had remained fixed on the floor throughout the hearing, met the judge's directly. There was fire in that gaze. There were years of humiliation, of being underestimated, of being invisible. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," she said in a clear, firm voice. Carter looked at her surprised. Most defendants remained silent during preliminary hearings, letting their lawyers speak for them. But there was something in the way this young woman looked at her that caused a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Do you have anything relevant to add to the case? She asked skeptically. I speak 10 languages. Emily pronounced each word with crystal clarity, without an ounce of doubt in her voice. And I can prove it right here, right now, if Your Honor permits me. The silence that followed was so deep that one could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. Everyone present leaned forward, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, and then Judge Evelyn Carter did something no one expected. She threw her head back and let out a laugh. It wasn't a polite or contained laugh. It was a booming, almost hysterical laugh that made her stout figure vibrate on the bench. This is incredible, she exclaimed between laughs, wiping tears from her eyes with a handkerchief. The defendant wants to prove she speaks 10 languages right here in my court. Other laughs joined the judges. Prosecutor Miller smiled widely, shaking his head in disbelief. Some members of the public laughed openly. Others whispered mocking comments. Miss Davies. Carter managed to control her laughter enough to speak, though her voice still trembled with amusement. I appreciate your creativity, but this is a court of justice, not a television talent show. We are not going to waste the court's time with circus demonstrations. Does justice seem like a circus to you? Emily's voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge's laughter froze instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a dangerous silence filled the room. Excuse me? Her voice dropped to a threatening tone. Emily took a step forward, ignoring Sarah Jenkins' warning tug on her arm. With all due respect, Your Honor, you just laughed at me without listening. You judged me without allowing me to present my defense. If that's not a circus, I don't know what is. Bailiff Peterson stepped forward, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Carter leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. You have guts, Miss Davies. I'll give you that. But guts won't save you from the evidence against you. The evidence lies, Emily replied. Or rather, the people who interpreted it lied because they never bothered to verify if I could actually do what I claimed. And why would we do that? Miller interjected from his seat. Why should the Crown spend resources verifying the fanciful claims of someone who is clearly trying to avoid the consequences of her actions? Because that is your obligation. Emily turned to the prosecutor, her voice gaining strength. Your obligation is to seek the truth, not assume guilt based on prejudice. Order. Carter slammed her gavel against the desk. Miss Davies, you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you remain silent before I charge you with contempt. Emily took a deep breath. She could feel her heart beating so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. But she wasn't going to back down. No, this time she had backed down her entire life. Your Honor, Sarah Jenkins rushed to intervene, her voice trembling but determined. I formally request that my client be allowed to demonstrate her linguistic abilities. If she can prove she speaks the languages she claims, that would fundamentally change the nature of this case. Carter looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. Miss Jenkins, are you really suggesting we turn this court into a language exam? I am suggesting we give my client the opportunity to properly defend herself, Sarah replied, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. Isn't that what justice represents? The judge leaned back in her chair, which creaked under her weight. She looked at Emily for a long moment, her eyes evaluating her as if she were a puzzle she couldn't solve. There was something about this young woman that unsettled her. It wasn't just her audacity. It was the absolute certainty in her eyes. All right, she finally said, to everyone's surprise in the room, I will give you your chance to publicly make a fool of yourself. But when you fail, and you will fail, I will add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your already considerable list of legal problems. She turned to her clerk. Contact the linguistics department at the University of Toronto. I need them to send 10 professors, one specialist in each of the languages Miss Davies claims to speak. Emily felt an electric shock run through her body. She would finally have her chance. Finally, someone would listen. Miss Davies, Carter looked at her with that mocking smile she had perfected for decades. I hope you know what you're doing, because when this is over, I'm not just going to find you guilty of fraud, but everyone will know exactly what kind of liar you are. I am not a liar, Emily responded in a quiet but firm voice. And when this is over, you are going to have to apologize. The room erupted in scandalous murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Judge Carter like that. Silence. The gavel slammed again. Carter looked at Emily with a mixture of fury and something that might have been respect. This hearing is adjourned until the evaluators are present. It will be in 3 days. And believe me, Miss Davies, those 3 days will be the last days of freedom you enjoy for a long time. As bailiffs escorted her out of the room, Emily couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she had finally taken the first step toward the vindication she so longed for. What she didn't know was that the next few days would reveal secrets that would change not only her fate but that of everyone present in that room. The metallic clang of the doors closing echoed like thunder in Emily's ears. The Maple Ridge Detention Center was a 3-story building that smelled of industrial disinfectant mixed with human despair. The white, peeling walls seemed to absorb all the natural light that tried to enter through the small, barred windows. Emily walked down the hallway flanked by 2 officers. Her handcuffs had been removed, but the feeling of oppression remained, now invisible but heavier than any metal. Other inmates watched her from their cells, some with curiosity, others with that empty gaze that only prolonged confinement can create. Cell 47C, announced Officer Amanda White, a young woman with a professional but not cruel expression. She opened the metal door with a squeak that echoed down the corridor. "You have a cellmate. I hope you get along." Emily entered, and the door closed behind her with a definitive thump that made her shudder. The cell was small, 2 narrow bunks, a small sink, an unprivate toilet, and a window so high it only served to remind them that the outside world existed but was out of reach. On the lower bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a worn book. Brenda O'Malley had a face marked by lines that told stories she would probably never share. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, though tired, still retained a spark of intelligence. "So you're the famous polyglot," Brenda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The whole center is talking about you, the girl who defied Judge Carter and lived to tell the tale." Emily sat on the upper bunk, feeling the thin, hard mattress under her body. She didn't respond immediately. She was exhausted, not only physically but emotionally. The adrenaline from the hearing had evaporated, leaving only a heavy emptiness in her chest. "I'm not famous," she finally said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being underestimated." Brenda let out a dry laugh. "In here, we're all tired of something. The difference is, most have already given up. You still have fire. That's dangerous in a place like this." "Dangerous? Why?" "Because hope hurts more than resignation." Brenda closed her book. "Do you really speak 10 languages?" Emily nodded, looking at the stained cell ceiling. 11, actually. But no one asked. 11? Brenda sat up, genuinely interested. "How is it possible for a girl your age to speak 11 languages?" For the first time in days, Emily felt like talking. Perhaps because Brenda wasn't looking at her with mockery or disdain. Perhaps because in that small, claustrophobic space, they were both just 2 human beings trying to survive. "My grandmother," Emily began, her voice softening with the memory. "Grandmother Eleanor. She worked all her life as a domestic worker for diplomatic families. Every time one family left, another arrived. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She learned bits and pieces of all those languages to communicate, to be indispensable." Brenda listened in silence, and Emily continued. "When my parents died in a bus accident, I was 5 years old. My grandmother picked me up and took me with her to all those houses. While she cleaned, cooked, and ironed, I sat with the children of those families. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice broke slightly as she remembered. "Diplomats changed every 2 or 3 years. Every time I made a friend, they left. Every time I learned to communicate perfectly in one language, a new family arrived with a different language. But I never stopped learning. It was my way of keeping those memories, those connections, alive." "And your grandmother?" Brenda asked softly. "She died 2 years ago. Heart attack. 50 years of working from sunrise to sunset ended up killing her." Emily closed her eyes tightly. "And I was left alone, without formal education, without certificates to prove what I knew, only with languages in my head, and no way to prove they were real." "Then you started working as a translator," Brenda completed. "I tried to get jobs at official agencies, but they all wanted university degrees, international certifications. No one wanted to give me even a chance to prove what I could do." The frustration was palpable in her voice. "So I created my own business. I offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, and did impeccable work." "Then why are you here?" Emily opened her eyes and looked directly at Brenda. "Because someone decided it was impossible for a girl without a university education to do what I did. They reported my services as fraud, without even verifying the quality of my work, and now I'm here waiting to prove something I should never have had to prove." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. The door opened, and Officer White reappeared. "Davies, you have a visitor. Consultation room." Emily got off the bunk, confused. She hadn't called anyone. She had no one to call. The consultation room was a small space divided by a metal table. Sitting on the other side was Sarah Jenkins, her public defender. But she wasn't alone. Next to her was a woman Emily didn't know. Elegant, professional, with a leather briefcase on the table. "Emily, this is Dr. Fiona Campbell." Sarah made the introductions. "She's a forensic psychologist." Prosecutor Miller requested a psychological evaluation before the next hearing. Emily felt a knot forming in her stomach. Psychological evaluation? Why? Dr. Campbell spoke in a calm, professional voice. It's standard procedure in cases where the accused exhibits behaviors that could be considered unusual. Your confrontation with Judge Carter raised some flags. Flags? Emily felt indignation growing. "Defending myself is unusual behavior. It's not about that," Sarah intervened quickly. "Emily, listen. The prosecutor is trying to build a profile that suggests you have tendencies towards pathological fantasy. They want to argue that you genuinely believe you speak those languages, when in reality you don't. That's ridiculous." Emily slammed her palm on the table. "I'm not crazy. No one is saying you are." Dr. Campbell maintained her neutral tone. "But I need to do my evaluation. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." For the next hour, Emily answered question after question about her childhood, the death of her parents, living with her grandmother, learning languages, feeling alone, her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. Dr. Campbell took meticulous notes, her expression unreadable. "One last question," she finally said. "Have you ever felt that people don't understand you, that you live in a different world than others?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "Every day of my life, but not because I'm crazy, but because I've lived in worlds most people will never experience. I've spoken in languages most people will never learn. I've seen how words can build bridges or raise walls. So yes, I live in a different world, but it's real. It's as real as the prejudice that brought me here." The doctor closed her notebook. "Thank you for your cooperation, Emily. I will submit my report before the hearing." When she left, Sarah approached Emily, her expression worried. "There's something else you need to know. Judge Carter contacted the University of Toronto, but it wasn't just to get evaluators." "What do you mean?" "She investigated your background further. She found something." Sarah pulled some documents from her bag. "Years ago, when you were 17, you applied for a scholarship at the International Language Academy. Do you remember?" Emily nodded slowly. "They rejected me. They said my application was unrealistic because I claimed to speak too many languages for my age." "Exactly. And Carter is using that as evidence that you've been lying about your abilities for years." She argues it's a pattern of fraudulent behavior. The room seemed to shrink around Emily. Every time she tried to move forward, the system pushed her back. Every attempt to prove her worth became another piece of evidence against her. "Is there anything else?" she asked, fearing the answer. Sarah hesitated before continuing. "The evaluators who are coming, Carter specifically asked for the strictest professors, known for being extremely rigorous. They're not coming to give you a fair chance, Emily. They're coming to dismantle you." The silence that followed was crushing. Emily could feel the weight of the entire justice system pressing against her, trying to crush that spark of hope that still burned in her chest. "How much time do I have?" she finally asked. 2 more days. The hearing is the day after tomorrow. Then I need to use every second." Emily stood up, her determination renewed despite everything. "Sarah, I need you to get me something. Books, study materials, in every language you can find. If they're going to make this difficult, then I'm going to prepare like never before in my life." Sarah looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Emily, even if you prove you speak those languages, the prosecutor has other charges. The clients who reported fraud, the complaints about incorrect translations." "Incorrect translations?" Emily interrupted her. "What incorrect translations?" "There are 3 clients who claim the translations you did contained serious errors that cost them money and reputation." Emily felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. I reviewed every translation 3 times. I was meticulous. I would never, ever have delivered something with serious errors." "Do you have copies of those translations?" "All of them. On my computer. But the police confiscated it as evidence." Sarah made a note. "I'm going to request access to those files. If we can prove the translations were correct, that would dismantle part of the prosecutor's accusation." When Emily returned to her cell, Brenda was waiting with a curious expression. "Bad news. Getting worse." Emily dropped onto her bunk. "Not only do I have to prove I speak 10 languages in front of professors who have already decided I'm lying, I also have to prove that translations I know I did correctly have no errors and defend myself against a psychological evaluation. that will probably paint me as delusional. Brenda whistled softly. When you said you had fire, you weren't kidding. But, Emily, are you sure you want to go through with this? Could you accept a plea bargain, serve a shorter sentence, go on with my life and give up? Emily looked at the ceiling. Accept that the world is right and I'm wrong? I can't, Brenda. If I give up now, I'd be betraying my grandmother. All those years of learning, all those girls who, like me, have talent but no papers to prove it. Then rest. Brenda turned off the cell light. Because in 2 days, you're going to need every ounce of strength you have. In the darkness, Emily closed her eyes but couldn't sleep. Her mind reviewed vocabulary, grammar, idioms in each of the languages she had learned. But more than that, she thought of all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. The world was about to see what she was capable of. She just hoped it would be enough. Dawn broke at the detention center with that heavy silence that only exists in places where freedom is a distant memory. Emily hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind continued to process verb conjugations, grammatical structures, idiomatic expressions in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. Brenda snored softly on the lower bunk, a comforting sound amid so much uncertainty. Emily had spent the night whispering words softly, each language flowing like rivers, converging into the ocean of her memory. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her concentration. It was too early for breakfast. The metal door opened, and Officer White appeared with a serious expression. Davies, you have a visitor. Consultation room. Now. Brenda woke up startled. At this hour? Who visits someone before dawn? Emily got off her bunk, her heart beginning to beat faster. She followed White down the empty corridors, the echo of their footsteps resonating like war drums. When they reached the consultation room, the surprise on Emily's face was evident. Sitting on the other side of the table was a man of East Asia, Emily whispered, incredulous. David Wong stood up abruptly, his hands visibly trembling. He was one of the 3 clients who had reported her translations as fraudulent. He worked for a technology company that needed documents translated from English to Mandarin for an expansion into China. Miss Davies, I need to speak with you. His voice was choked, as if each word cost him physical effort. I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here. White closed the door but remained inside. Standard protocol for unofficially authorized visits. What are you doing here? Emily sat down slowly, trying to process this surreal situation. Wong ran his hands over his face, and Emily noticed the deep dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. I came to tell you the truth I should have told from the beginning. The silence that followed was so dense that Emily could hear her own pulse. Your translations were perfect. Wong blurted out the words as if he had been holding his breath for months. Every document you translated for my company was impeccable, better than any professional agency we had used before. The partners in Beijing were impressed with the technical accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Emily felt as if the ground moved beneath her feet. Then why? Because my boss, the CEO, discovered that I had hired your services without verifying your university credentials. Wong looked down, shame evident in every line of his face. He threatened to fire me if I didn't find a way to justify why I had spent company funds on an uncertified translator, and he decided to destroy my life to save his job. Emily felt a mixture of fury and vindication growing in her chest. It wasn't that simple. Wong looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Mr. Robert Green, our company's corporate lawyer, suggested we report the translations as defective. He said it was the only way to recover the money and protect the company from any legal liability. He suggested lying? Emily's voice rose in pitch. He suggested protecting corporate interests. Wong corrected bitterly. In the business world, Miss Davies, truth is secondary to financial survival. But I haven't been able to sleep since I signed that false statement. I have a daughter your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face on the news, being publicly humiliated for something you didn't do. Emily took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Why are you telling me this now? Why not before the trial? Because I'm a coward, Wong admitted, his voice breaking. Because I needed my job, my salary, my reputation. But seeing what they've done to you, seeing Judge Carter laughing at you on television, was too much. My wife told me last night that she couldn't continue living with a man without honor, and she was right. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. Here's everything. Copies of the original translations with the approvals of our partners in Beijing. Emails where they specifically praise your work, and my sworn affidavit, admitting I lied under corporate pressure. Emily took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, full of pages that could completely change her case. "Mr. Wong, do you understand what this means for you?" she asked softly. "Admitting perjury could send you to prison." "I know," Wong smiled sadly. "But I prefer to be in prison with my honor intact than free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of." White approached the table. "Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is already irregular." Wong stood up, but before leaving, he looked directly into Emily's eyes. "Miss Davies, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you'll permit a piece of advice, when you're in that room tomorrow, don't just prove you speak those languages. Prove why it matters. Prove that real talent doesn't need certificates to be valid." When he left, Emily remained alone in the room, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. Tears she had been holding back for days finally began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief mixed with anger for everything she had had to endure because of corporate lies. The door opened again, and Sarah Jenkins rushed in, her hair disheveled and an expression of controlled panic. "Emily, what was that? White called me saying David Wong was here. What did he want?" Emily handed her the envelope. "Our salvation." As Sarah frantically reviewed the documents, her eyes widened with each page. This is incredible. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove that the translations were correct and that the accusations were fabricated. But will it be enough? Emily asked. "I still have to prove I speak the languages, and the prosecutor will probably say that Wong is lying now to help me." "You're right." Sarah sat down, her mind working at full speed. "We need more. We need to find the other 2 clients who accused you. And how do we do that from here?" Sarah pulled out her phone. "Leave it to me. I have contacts. If Wong had an attack of conscience, maybe the others will too." For the next few hours, while Emily was escorted back to her cell, Sarah worked frantically, making calls, sending emails, moving every contact she had in her legal arsenal. Back in the cell, Brenda watched Emily with curiosity. "Something changed," she said simply. "You have a different expression. One of my accusers came to confess that he lied." Emily sat down, still processing everything. "It turns out my translations were perfect. They falsely accused me to protect corporate interests." Brenda whistled softly. "The system protecting itself. Same old story, but this time someone had the courage to tell the truth." Emily looked out the small, high window. "He risked everything to clear my name. And that gives you hope?" "It gives me more than hope. It gives me proof that I'm not crazy, that I'm not wrong, that the world is wrong about me." A metallic clang echoed down the hallway. It was time for the mobile library, a cart that passed twice a week with books for inmates. A young woman pushed the cart, stopping at each cell. When she reached cell 47, Emily recognized her. It was Chloe Smith, a girl barely 19 whom she had seen in the dining hall. She had intelligent eyes and that particular sadness of someone who has seen too much, too young. "Any books you need?" Chloe asked softly. "Do you have anything in foreign languages?" Emily asked hopefully. Chloe's eyes lit up. "Are you the girl who's going to prove she speaks 10 languages?" 11, actually. "I have something for you." Chloe nervously looked both ways down the hallway before pulling out a package wrapped in paper. "Your lawyer asked me to bring you these. I shouldn't, but well, I believe in second chances." Emily unwrapped the package and found 6 books in different languages: Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. They weren't ordinary books, but complex legal technical texts. "Your lawyer said to practice with these," Chloe whispered. "The professors tomorrow are going to try to trip you up with specialized technical vocabulary." "How do you know?" "Because one of them, Dr. Andrew Thompson, came here for a legal consultation a few days ago. I overheard him talking to the director about how to unmask an imposter who claimed impossible linguistic abilities." Emily's blood ran cold. "Did he say anything else?" "He said he had prepared specialized technical texts in each language. Medical, legal, scientific vocabulary, things only someone with years of formal university study could know." Brenda sat up in her bunk. "That's cheating. They're setting up an exam designed for you to fail. It's not cheating if they never promise to be fair." Emily opened the first book, her eyes scanning the Mandarin pages. "But I can learn. I've always been able to learn." "You have less than 24 hours, Chloe pointed out. "How are you going to memorize technical vocabulary in 6 languages in one day?" Emily looked at her with that fierce determination that had kept her alive all her life. "The same way I've done everything else, by not giving up." When Chloe left, Brenda watched Emily open book after book, her concentration absolute. "Do you know what's most impressive about you?" Brenda said after a long silence. "It's not that you speak languages. It's that you never accept defeat as an option. My grandmother used to say, "The world will tell you 1,000 times you can't. You only need to prove it once to show that you can." Emily spent the rest of the day and all night immersed in those books. She barely ate, barely moved. Brenda brought her water, reminded her to breathe, but Emily was in another world, a world of words, meanings, linguistic connections. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the high window, Emily closed the last book. Her eyes were red, her body trembled with exhaustion, but there was something different in her expression. "Ready?" Brenda asked. "Ready," Emily replied. Officer White arrived early. "Davies, it's time. Your lawyer is waiting. Today's the day." As she walked through the corridors towards the exit, other inmates began to bang on their cell doors. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of support. Many of them had heard her story. Many of them had been judged by what the system believed them to be, rather than by what they truly were. "Show them," someone shouted. "Don't let them crush you," another voice joined in. Emily felt a strange energy coursing through her body. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. All those anonymous faces behind the metal doors were reminders that there were more people like her, waiting for an opportunity to prove their truth. Sarah was waiting for her in the processing area with something unexpected. A suitcase. "What is this?" Emily asked. "Your future, if all goes well." Sarah opened the suitcase, revealing a professional outfit. "You're not going into that room as an accused. You're going in as the professional you are." As Emily changed, Sarah gave her the latest news. "I found the second client. He's willing to testify that his accusation was also false. The third still hasn't responded, but 2 out of 3 is enough to create reasonable doubt." "And the psychological evaluation?" Sarah grimaced. "Dr. Campbell submitted her report. It's mixed. It doesn't say you're crazy, but it doesn't fully defend you either. It suggests you have an unconventional personality with high confidence in self-taught abilities. That's just a fancy way of saying, they don't trust me." "Exactly. That's why you need to be perfect today. Not just good, perfect." The transport vehicle took them to the courthouse. The building looked different in the dawn light. More imposing, more intimidating, like a Roman Colosseum where gladiators fought for their lives. But Emily was no longer the same person who had entered there days ago. Now she had proof, she had allies, and more importantly, she had the truth. The courtroom was even more crowded than the first time. News cameras filled every allowed corner. Journalists whispered among themselves, and in the front row, 10 University of Toronto professors waited with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. Judge Carter entered with the same arrogance as always, but when her gaze met Emily's, something changed in her eyes. Perhaps she recognized that this would not be the easy victory she had anticipated. "Let the show begin," she murmured, slamming her gavel. And so began the day that would change everything. Judge Carter's gavel slammed like a gunshot in the crowded courtroom. The collective murmur instantly died down, replaced by a tension so dense that the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "Order in the court." Carter uttered the words with that authoritative tone she had perfected over decades on the bench. Her eyes swept over the crowd before resting on the 10 professors seated in a special row in front of the bench. "University of Toronto professors, thank you for your presence. Today we will conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I consider a waste of time, but which the accused has insisted on carrying out." Emily stood next to Sarah, her posture erect despite the exhaustion she felt in every fiber of her being. 24 hours without sleep, studying technical vocabulary that most people would take years to master. But she was not most people. Dr. Andrew Thompson rose, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that conveyed academic superiority. He was a slender man with dark hair slicked back with gel, and that expression of someone who considers formal knowledge the only valid knowledge. "Your Honor," he began in a clear, academic voice, "my colleagues and I have prepared a series of rigorous evaluations. It's not simply about conversing in different languages, but about demonstrating technical mastery, deep cultural understanding, and specialized translation ability. Proceed." Carter gestured with her hand, leaning back in her chair as if about to witness a cheap magic show. Thompson opened a thick folder. "Miss Davies, we will begin with Mandarin. Professor Hana Kim, although a Japanese specialist, also masters Mandarin, and will evaluate this first section." A middle-aged East Asian woman stood up. Professor Kim had a serene presence, but her gaze was analytical, dissecting Emily with every passing second. The professor spoke in perfect, fluid Mandarin, asking Emily to read a medical text and then explain its meaning in English. She handed her a document. Emily took the paper. It was a complex medical text on cardiovascular procedures, full of technical terminology that would make any professional translator sweat. The room held its breath. Emily read the document silently for 30 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she began to speak in fluid Mandarin. Her pronunciation impeccable, her tones precise. She not only read the text but explained it, adding cultural context about how certain Chinese medical terms differ in concept from Western ones. Then she switched to English without pause, translating not only the words, but the deep meaning, explaining the medical implications with a level of detail that left even Professor Kim speechless. The professor murmured something in Mandarin to Thompson, commenting that Emily's pronunciation was perfect and impossible for someone without formal training. "I know," Emily responded in the same language, looking directly at Kim. Then she switched to English, "Because I learned from the Wang family, diplomats who lived in Beijing for 6 years. Their young daughter taught me not only the language but the songs, the games, the ways of thinking. Language is not just words, Professor, it's soul." A murmur ran through the room. Journalist Michael Dubois scribbled frantically in his notebook. This was journalistic gold. "Next language," Thompson said sharply, clearly uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. "German." Professor Julian Schneider. Schneider was a corpulent man with a blonde beard and a severe, typically Germanic expression. He stood up and spoke in clipped German with a deliberately complicated accent, asking Emily to explain the clauses of a legal contract and its legal implications. He handed her a dense legal contract, full of German legal jargon that even native lawyers would find challenging. Emily read it, and again her response was more than perfect. She not only translated, but identified potential legal problems in the contract, pointed out linguistic ambiguities that could cause disputes, and did it all while fluidly alternating between German and English. Schneider looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and bewilderment. He asked her in German where she had learned all that. Emily responded in fluent German before translating into English. "From the Schmidt family. Mr. Schmidt was an international lawyer. His wife would sit me in his office while he worked. I was 10 years old and would read his contracts while he thought I was just drawing. I learned that legal German is like a puzzle where every word has exact weight." Sarah Jenkins watched with tears in her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. Emily was not only demonstrating competence, she was demonstrating mastery. Arabic. Thompson practically spat the word. Professor Leila Khan. Khan was an elegant woman with an intelligent, calculating expression. She spoke in classical Arabic, the kind used in religious and academic texts, deliberately archaic and complex. She asked Emily to read a religious text and explain its deep philosophical meaning. It was a text with complex philosophical commentaries. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was something different in her expression. She began to recite in Arabic, her voice taking on that particular melodic cadence of the well-spoken language. She not only translated the text but explained the multiple layers of interpretation, the historical references, the theological debates the passage had generated for centuries. She spoke about how classical Arabic differs from modern Arabic, about the inherent poetry in each verse. Khan stood up, visibly moved. "How is this possible? This requires years of theological study." "The Al-Rahman family," Emily responded softly in English. "The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic is not just a language, it's a way of seeing the universe, that every word has roots, history, connection with other words. It's a language that breathes poetry." Judge Carter no longer leaned back in her chair. She was leaning forward. Her expression had changed from mockery to something that might have been involuntary respect. One after another, the professors presented their challenges. Russian with Dr. Sergei Popov, who asked her to recite classical literature and explain complex literary symbolism. French with culinary and wine terminology so specific that only a professional sommelier or chef would know. Italian with opera and music. Brazilian Portuguese with complex regional idioms. Japanese with multiple writing systems. Korean with intricate levels of formality. Each time, Emily not only met but exceeded expectations, and each time she added that personal dimension, that learning story that revealed not only technical knowledge but deep understanding and genuine love for each language. When Dr. Popov asked her to explain a passage of classic Russian literature, Emily not only translated the words but captured the melancholic soul of the text, explaining historical and emotional contexts that only someone truly immersed in Russian culture could understand. "The Ivanova family," she explained. "Mr. Ivanova was a literature professor. He would read Dostoevsky to me while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12 years old and would cry with the stories. He told me that if you can't feel Russian suffering in the words, you're not really reading the masters. The professor evaluating French presented her with a text on wines, with terminology so specialized that it seemed designed to make even professional translators fail. Emily not only identified every grape variety, every wine region mentioned, but explained the cultural subtleties of why certain French words to describe wine have no exact translation into English. Monsieur Levesque was a sommelier, she explained with a nostalgic smile. He would let me smell the wines while he worked. He said that the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes earth, sun, time. It is not translated, it is felt. But then came the moment that would change everything. The last language was Hebrew. Thompson, who also mastered Hebrew in addition to English, personally rose for this evaluation. He had saved what he considered his masterpiece for last. "Miss Davies," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This last text is particularly challenging. It is an ancient philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, extremely complex even for dedicated scholars." He handed her the document. Emily began to read, and suddenly her expression changed. It wasn't confusion or difficulty, it was recognition. "Professor Thompson," she said slowly. I know this text. You know it?" Thompson smiled smugly. "I highly doubt you've had access to ancient Hebrew philosophical manuscripts." "No, the manuscript." Emily looked up, her eyes shining with something dangerous. "I know the translation, because I did it." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop making noise. "Excuse me?" Thompson blinked. Emily pointed to the document. "6 years ago, when I was 17, I worked for an online translation service under a pseudonym. An anonymous client requested the translation of this philosophical treatise from ancient Hebrew to modern English. He paid well, but asked for complete anonymity. I spent 3 weeks working on this, researching every word, every concept. It was one of my first professional jobs." She turned to Thompson, her voice gaining strength. "And you, Professor Thompson, published an academic article 4 years ago titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that article. You used my translation word for word without giving credit." The room erupted in scandalous murmurs. Thompson paled visibly. That's an absurd accusation," he stammered. "Do you have any proof?" "I have all my working files," Emily responded calmly, "including translation notes, preliminary versions, correspondence with the client, all saved on my computer, the same computer that is in the possession of the prosecution as evidence." Sarah Jenkins jumped up. "Your Honor, I request immediate access to those digital files. If what my client says is true, this not only demonstrates her competence, but exposes academic plagiarism." Crown Prosecutor Miller looked like a cornered animal. "Your Honor, this is a distraction. It's not relevant to the case." "Not relevant." Carter finally found her voice. "Mr. Miller, if the accused can demonstrate that one of the evaluators I chose used her work without credit, that is extremely relevant to this case. It shows that she is not only competent, but has been competent for years." She turned to Thompson, her expression now cold. "Professor Thompson, do you have anything to say?" Thompson opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other professors looked at him with mixtures of shock and disgust. In the academic world, plagiarism was the unforgivable sin. I received that translation from a colleague. I didn't know it was from an online service. I assumed it was public work." "Assumed?" Professor Khan stood up, her voice sharp. "Professor Thompson, academic protocol requires verifying the source of all material. This is basic," Dr. Schneider added in a stern tone. "If this is true, the University of Toronto will have to formally investigate." Carter slammed her gavel. "Order! Bailiff Peterson, bring the evidence computer." Now, while they waited, Emily remained standing, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. She had waited 6 years for this moment. 6 years since she saw her work published under someone else's name. She never thought justice would come this way, but life had strange ways of coming full circle. Peterson returned with the laptop in an evidence bag. The court technician turned it on, and under judicial supervision, Sarah navigated to the files Emily indicated. Everything was there. The preliminary versions of the translation dated 6 years ago, the detailed notes explaining each translation decision, the emails with the client, and most damning, the final version, identical word for word to what Thompson had published in his supposedly original article. Carter personally examined the files, her expression growing darker with each document she reviewed. Finally, she looked up at Thompson. "Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union. You're going to need legal representation." She turned to the other 9 professors. "Does anyone else have doubts about Miss Davies' linguistic competence?" One by one, each professor shook their head. Professor Khan even stood up. "Your Honor, in my 20 years evaluating linguistic competence, I have never seen anyone with the mastery this young woman has demonstrated today. She not only speaks these languages, she lives them, she understands them at levels most academics can only aspire to. And she did it without resources, without privilege, only with determination and genuine love for learning." Khan's words resonated in the room. Carter leaned back in her chair, running a hand over her face. For the first time in decades, she seemed genuinely unsure of how to proceed. "Mr. Miller," she finally said, "do you have anything else to present?" The prosecutor stood up slowly. He knew he had lost. "Your Honor, in light of these developments and considering that 2 of the 3 complaining clients have withdrawn their accusations and confessed to lying under corporate pressure, the prosecution requests to withdraw all charges." The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Carter slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in my court!" When silence returned, Carter looked at Emily for a long moment. In her eyes was something that had never been there before. "Miss Davies," her voice was unusually soft, "this court owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. I allowed prejudice to cloud my judgment. I assumed that extraordinary talent requires institutional validation when you have demonstrated that true talent transcends institutions." She paused, as if the next words cost her physical effort to pronounce. "All charges against you are withdrawn. You are free of all accusation. Furthermore, I order that your computer and all your personal effects be returned to you immediately." She slammed the gavel one last time. "This case is closed." The room erupted in applause. Sarah hugged Emily, both crying. Journalists ran to the exits to publish the news. Professors surrounded Emily, offering apologies, job offers, academic opportunities. But Emily could only think of one thing. Finally, after a lifetime of being underestimated, the world had heard her voice, and that voice had spoken in 11 languages. The doors of the Maple Ridge Detention Center opened with a metallic creak that sounded like heavenly music. Emily took her first step as a free woman in days that had felt like years. The afternoon sun hit her face with an intensity that almost made her recoil. Freedom, vindication, justice. But the scene awaiting her outside was not the tranquility she had imagined. Dozens of journalists swarmed towards her like waves breaking against the coast, cameras flashing, microphones extending like tentacles, voices shouting questions that merged into an incomprehensible chaos. "Miss Davies, how do you feel? Is Emily going to sue Judge Carter? Tell us about Professor Thompson. Is it true you speak 11 languages?" Sarah appeared at her side, forming a protective shield with her body as they tried to push their way towards the waiting vehicle. But before they could advance 2 meters, an elegant woman stood directly in their path. She was of imposing stature, perfectly coiffed silver hair, a suit that screamed power and money. Linda Thompson, according to the corporate identification hanging from her neck, CEO of Thompson Global Translation Services. "Miss Davies," her voice cut through the surrounding noise with natural authority. "I'm Linda Thompson. I need to speak with you now." "Miss Thompson, my client has just been released," Sarah intervened. "It's not the appropriate time. I understand perfectly, but what I have to tell you cannot wait." Harrington looked directly at Emily, completely ignoring Sarah. "Your case has generated international attention. I have 17 job offers from different countries for you, and something more important, information about your grandmother that I think you'll want to hear." Emily stopped dead in her tracks. "My grandmother? What do you know about my grandmother?" "Not here." Thompson pointed towards a black limousine discreetly parked half a block away. 5 minutes of your time. If afterwards you want to leave, I will personally take you wherever you wish." Sarah squeezed Emily's arm in warning, but there was something in Thompson's eyes that wasn't threatening. It was urgency mixed with respect. "Okay," Emily accepted. 5 minutes. Inside the limousine, away from the chaos of journalists, Thompson handed her a leather folder. 20 years ago, I was Director of Human Resources at one of the country's most prestigious translation agencies. Your grandmother, Eleanor Davies, applied for a position. We rejected her." Emily felt a pang of pain in her chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we made the same mistake the system made with you." Eleanor spoke 6 languages fluently, but she had no university degrees. "We rejected her without even properly evaluating her. She wrote me a letter after that interview. A letter I kept for 2 decades because I was too ashamed to reread it." Thompson pulled out a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Emily would recognize it anywhere. "Read it," Thompson insisted. With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope and began to read. Her grandmother's words flowed from the page like a river of wisdom and pain. "Dear Miss Thompson, I don't blame you for rejecting me. The world operates on paper, not abilities. But I want you to know that I will dedicate my life to ensuring that my granddaughter never has to beg for opportunities she deserves. I will teach her everything I know, and someday, when she succeeds, I hope you remember that talent does not need external validation to be real." Emily finished reading with tears rolling down her cheeks. Her grandmother had always known, always planned to prepare her for a world that would reject them both. "When I saw your case in the news," Thompson continued softly, "I knew immediately who you were, Eleanor's granddaughter, the child she spoke of in that letter, and I realized I had the opportunity to correct a mistake I made 2 decades ago." "What do you want from me?" Emily asked directly. "I want to hire you, not as a common translator, but as director of unconventional talent. Your job will be to identify and recruit people like you, people with extraordinary abilities, but without traditional credentials, people the system ignores." The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true, but something in Thompson's expression told Emily there was more. "What else?" she pressed. Thompson smiled slightly. "You're perceptive. Good. There's something else. Your grandmother worked for many diplomatic families, as you know. But there's one family in particular, the Spencer family, for whom she worked during the last 5 years of her life. They were British diplomats. They left the country abruptly 3 years ago. And they left something for you, something your grandmother asked them to keep until you were ready. Mr. Spencer contacted me yesterday after seeing your case in the news. He's in town. He wants to meet with you." Before Emily could respond, her phone, just returned by the police, began to ring incessantly. Missed calls, text messages, social media notifications exploding. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from an unknown number with an international prefix. "Miss Davies, I'm Agent Ben Carter from the International Refugee Organization. Your story has resonated with millions. We have a proposal that could change lives. Please contact me urgently." Sarah, who had been checking her own phone, looked up with an expression of shock. "Emily, you need to see this." She showed her screen. The video of the hearing had gone viral. More than 15 million views in less than 6 hours. The hashtag number Justice for Emily was trending worldwide. But it wasn't just that. There was another video published just minutes ago. Someone had leaked the security footage from the detention center. In it, Emily was clearly seen studying all night, murmuring in different languages, preparing with a determination that bordered on superhuman. "The whole world is talking about you," Sarah murmured. "You're a symbol now." "I don't want to be a symbol," Emily responded in a tired voice. "I just want to live my life." "Too late for that," Thompson intervened pragmatically. "You now have a platform. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" The phone rang again. This time it was a number Emily recognized. Brenda, her cellmate. "Emily, I need you to come. It's urgent." "Brenda, what's wrong?" "It's about the center's director. It turns out he also has secrets, and I think they're connected to your grandmother, but I can't talk on the phone. You have to come." The call cut off abruptly. Emily looked at Sarah with growing alarm. "Something's wrong." Brenda sounded scared. Before they could decide what to do, another figure appeared at the limousine window. An older man, about 60-something, with a gentle but urgent expression, tapped the glass softly. Thompson lowered the window. "Dr. Wilson, Miss Thompson, thank you for contacting me." The man spoke with a refined British accent. "Miss Davies, I'm Dr. James Wilson. I worked as the Spencer family's personal physician for years. I also cared for your grandmother, Eleanor, in her last months." Emily got out of the limousine, feeling the world spinning too fast. "You knew my grandmother." "I knew her very well, and there are things about her death that you need to know. Things she made me promise to tell you when the time was right." "What things?" Dr. Wilson looked nervously around. "Not here. There are people who would prefer certain information to remain buried. Your grandmother did not die of a simple heart attack, Miss Davies. There were complications she kept secret. Complications related to something she discovered while working for the Spencers." Emily's heart began to pound. What did she discover? Documents. Sensitive information about trafficking networks that used diplomatic families as cover. Your grandmother reported them to the appropriate authorities, but she died before she could formally testify. Emily's world stopped. "Are you saying my grandmother was?" "I don't know for sure," the doctor interrupted quickly. "What I do know is that she left evidence stored away, evidence that the Spencers protected after her death. And now that you are in the public eye, there are people who will want to make sure that evidence never comes to light. Sarah placed herself protectively beside Emily. Dr. Wilson, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I have Eleanor's complete medical records, and I have the letters she wrote to me in her last days. Letters where she specifically mentions that if anything happened to her, I should contact her granddaughter when she was strong enough to handle the truth. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. This is just the beginning, Miss Davies. Your grandmother meticulously documented everything. Names, dates, trafficking routes. She stored it all in a safety deposit box at an international bank, and you are the only person authorized to open it. Emily took the envelope, feeling its weight, not just physically, but emotionally. Where is that box? Geneva, Switzerland, Helvetia International Bank. Your grandmother gave me the exact instructions before she died. She said, when Emily shows the world what she is capable of, when she can no longer be ignored or silenced, then she will be ready to know the whole truth. The words resonated in the silence of the limousine. All her life, Emily had thought her grandmother was simply a domestic worker who loved languages, but now she was discovering she had been much more, a woman who had seen injustices and had had the courage to confront them, even knowing the price she might pay. Is there anything else? Dr. Wilson added, his expression growing even more serious. The third client who accused you, the one who never withdrew his charges, his name is Richard Thorne. He works for a private security corporation with deep connections in diplomatic circles. I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the only one who maintained the accusations until the end. Are you suggesting my accusation was orchestrated? Emily felt a chill run down her spine. I'm suggesting that when your case became public, certain people saw an opportunity to discredit you before you could become a public voice. Before you could discover what your grandmother knew. Sarah grabbed her phone. We need police protection now. But before she could make the call, a black van abruptly pulled up in front of the limousine. A middle-aged man with a serious expression, federal identification hanging from his neck, got out. I'm Agent Ben Carter, Miss Davies. I need you to come with me. Your life may be in danger. How did you know where to find me? Emily asked, her survival instinct activating. Because we've been monitoring communications related to your case, and we've just intercepted a very worrying conversation. There's an active contract on you. Someone wants to make sure you never reach Geneva. The world Emily had just reclaimed was about to become much more dangerous, and the answers she sought were thousands of kilometers away in a safety deposit box containing secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. The decision was instantaneous. Emily looked Agent Carter directly in the eyes. I'm not going anywhere until I speak with Brenda. She needs me. Miss Davies, you don't understand the gravity, Carter insisted. There are dangerous people looking for you right now. And there's a friend who risked everything to help me when no one else would. Emily responded firmly. I won't abandon her now. Sarah touched her arm. Emily, maybe you should listen to the agent. I'll go with you. Dr. Wilson intervened unexpectedly. If there's a connection between the center's director and what your grandmother discovered, you need to know, and I can help protect you. Thompson closed her phone. I have contacts in private security. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. Carter sighed, acknowledging he had lost this battle. All right, but I'm coming with you, and if I see anything suspicious, we're leaving immediately. 15 minutes later, they were back at the Maple Ridge Detention Center. The building Emily had left with relief now greeted her with a sense of menace she hadn't felt before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows in the white hallways. Officer Sarah Lee, a young guard with a kind expression who had always been gentle with Emily, awaited them at the entrance. Miss Davies, thank you for coming, she whispered nervously. Brenda is very agitated. She keeps saying the director has something to do with your grandmother. I don't understand what she means, but she insists she'll only talk to you. Where is Director Davis? Carter asked professionally. In his office. He's been making calls all day. Since Miss Davies' case went viral, he's extremely nervous. Officer Lee guided them through corridors Emily knew too well. When they reached cell 47C, Brenda was sitting on her bunk, hugging her knees with an expression that mixed fear and determination. She jumped up when the door opened. Thank goodness you came. I thought you might not after everything you went through here. Brenda, what's wrong? What did you discover? Brenda looked nervously at the others present. Carter showed his federal identification. Anything you say here is protected. If you have relevant information, we need to hear it. Brenda took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I was cleaning near Director Davis's office. The door was ajar, and I overheard a phone conversation. He was talking to someone about Emily. He said things like, "The old woman was a problem, and the granddaughter can't know what she found." Emily's heart stopped. The old woman? He meant my grandmother? That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't sure. Then, today, after you were released, he was more agitated. He made another call. This time I heard clearly. He mentioned the name Eleanor Davies and something about documents that should never have reached her granddaughter's hands. Dr. Wilson stepped forward. Did Brenda mention anything about the Spencer families or international networks? Yes. Brenda nodded vigorously. He said the Spencers were fools for keeping those papers, that they should have destroyed them when they had the chance. Carter pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls. Sarah sat down, her mind working at full speed, processing the legal implications. But Emily could only feel one thing: rage. Rage that her grandmother had been put in danger. Rage that possibly her death had not been natural. Rage that even now, years later, the shadows of the past still haunted them. "I need to speak with him," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I need to speak with Davis now." "Emily, that's not prudent," Sarah warned. "I don't care about prudence." Emily turned to Carter. "You're a federal agent. You can make it official. I need answers about my grandmother." Carter considered for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll ask some questions, but you come with me, and if it gets dangerous, we leave." Director Robert Davis's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a thick-set man with thinning hair and the kind of nervousness that only guilt can generate. When Carter entered, showing his federal identification, the color drained from his face. "Agent, how can I help you?" His voice trembled slightly. "Director Davis, I have some questions about Eleanor Davies." The director blinked repeatedly. "Eleanor Davies? I don't know anyone by that name." "Liar." Emily entered the office, ignoring Carter's attempt to stop her. "My grandmother worked cleaning this center during her last year of life. You knew her, and it seems you also knew what she had discovered." Davis stood up abruptly. "Miss, I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me refresh your memory." Carter took out his recorder. "I have witnesses who overheard you talking about the old woman and about documents. Do you want to explain that to me?" The director began to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between Carter, Emily, and the door, like a trapped animal looking for escape. I just worked here. I didn't know anything about what she did outside, but you did know something." Emily leaned over the desk. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. Her death was sudden, convenient, just before she could testify about what she had discovered. I had nothing to do with her death," Davis shouted, losing his composure. "It was her heart. The doctors said so." "So you did know her," Carter observed coldly. "A moment ago, you said you didn't know anyone by that name." Davis slumped into his chair, defeated. All right. I knew Eleanor. She worked here cleaning for months. She was a good woman, quiet. But one day she came to me with information. Dangerous information? What information?" Emily felt tears threatening to escape, but she held them back with willpower. She said that while working for diplomatic families, she had seen things. Documents about people being moved illegally, families used as cover for criminal operations. She showed me copies. She asked me to help her report it to the appropriate authorities. "And you did?" Davis looked down, unable to meet Emily's eyes. "I told her I would, but I was scared. The people involved were powerful. They had connections. They had money. So I reported her intentions to someone else." The silence that fell in the office was heavier than any verbal accusation. "You betrayed her," Emily whispered the words, barely audible. "My grandmother trusted you, and you sold her out. I didn't know what they were going to do." Davis sobbed openly now. "They just told me they would keep an eye on her, that they would make sure she didn't cause trouble. I never thought they would, that they would kill her." Emily finished the sentence. "I don't know if they did." Davis sobbed openly now. "Her death was natural according to all reports, but I always wondered. I always lived with that doubt." Carter was already on the phone, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations, but Emily could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. Dr. Wilson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Emily, there's something else you need to know. Something your grandmother gave me before she died." From his briefcase, he took out a small, time-worn envelope. "She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think this is the time." With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's hand, the same handwriting she had seen in cookbooks, on shopping lists, in messages of maternal love. "My dearest Emily," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. It means Dr. Wilson kept his promise. and it means you are finally strong enough to know the whole truth. Throughout your life, I taught you languages. I taught you that words have power, that communication builds bridges, that understanding others is understanding the world. But I never told you why it was so important to me that you learned. When I was young, I witnessed injustices I could not stop. I saw people being exploited, families being separated, innocents being harmed, and I could do nothing because I had no power, I had no voice, I had no way to be heard. But you, my love, you have something I never had. You have the gift of languages. You can speak for those who have no voice. You can translate not only words, but injustices into justice, silence into truth. The documents I left in Geneva are not just evidence of crimes. They are voices of people who need to be heard, and you are the only one who can give them that voice. I know the path will be difficult. I know there will be people who will try to silence you as they tried to silence me, but I also know that you are stronger than I ever was. Because you not only have knowledge, you have courage. Do not cry for me, my child. If my heart stops before I can see your triumph, I will know it was because it gave everything to prepare you. And that is enough. Every language I taught you, every story I shared, every moment we spent together was preparing you for this moment, for when the world would finally listen to you. Now go to Geneva, open that box, tell those stories, give voice to the silenced, and when you do, you will know that your grandmother is proud, not because you speak 10 or 20 languages, but because you chose to use your gift for something greater than yourself. I love you, my child. I always loved you. I will always love you. Your grandmother Eleanor. Emily finished reading, and the tears she had held back for days finally flowed freely. They were not just tears of sadness, but of understanding, of purpose, of love that transcended even death. Brenda hugged her, crying too. Sarah had tears rolling down her cheeks. Even Carter, the hardened federal agent, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Dr. Wilson spoke softly. Your grandmother knew her time was limited. Her heart was weak, and the stress of what she had discovered worsened it. But she didn't stop. She kept documenting, kept gathering evidence, kept fighting because she knew you would continue her work. Emily carefully folded the letter, holding it against her chest as if it were her grandmother's embrace. I will go to Geneva, she said, her voice clear despite the tears. I will finish what she started. You won't go alone. Thompson entered the office, her expression determined. My company has offices in Switzerland. You'll have all the protection and resources you need. And I'm coming with you, Sarah added, as your lawyer and your friend. Me too, Brenda said surprisingly. I'm being released in 2 days, and after what they did to your grandmother, I want to help. Carter closed his phone. The RCMP is interested in this case. You'll have federal protection during the trip. He turned to the sobbing director. And Davis, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. As Davis was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Emily felt something change within her. She was no longer just a young woman trying to prove her worth. She was the heir to a legacy of courage and justice. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Now those seeds had grown into something more powerful, a voice that could not be silenced. At that moment, Thompson's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression turning serious. It was Mrs. Spencer. She's in town. She says she has something else. Your grandmother left her. Something she didn't even entrust to the bank. She wants to meet with you tonight. Emily nodded. Each revelation brought her closer to fully understanding who her grandmother had been and what she had sacrificed. Then let's go, she said. There's no time to lose because somewhere, in a safety deposit box in Geneva, truths waited that would change lives. And Emily Davies was ready to give them voice. The hotel where Mrs. Margaret Spencer was staying was one of those places that whispered stories of lives lived with elegance and purpose. Emily, accompanied by Sarah, Dr. Wilson, and Thompson, was welcomed into a suite with a view of the illuminated city. Margaret Spencer was a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, blue eyes that had seen too much of the world, and that dignity that only comes from a life dedicated to serving something greater than oneself. When she saw Emily, her eyes filled with tears. You are exactly as she said you would be, Margaret whispered, taking Emily's hands in hers. Eleanor spoke of you every day. She said you were her masterpiece, her living legacy. Mrs. Spencer, what do you know about my grandmother? Margaret invited them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared tea. Your grandmother Eleanor worked for my family for 5 years. She wasn't just our employee, she was part of our family. My husband was a British ambassador, and Eleanor was with us at every posting. But what no one knew is that Eleanor had a special gift. What gift? She could read people, understand intentions, and her knowledge of languages allowed her to overhear conversations others thought private. Margaret paused, her eyes distant with memories. One night, during a diplomatic reception at our home, Eleanor was serving when she overheard a conversation in Russian between two diplomats. They were discussing a network that used diplomatic families as cover to move people against their will. The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor came to me that night, trembling. She told me everything. My husband and I were horrified. He wanted to report it immediately, but Eleanor insisted on gathering more evidence first. For months, she meticulously documented everything: names, dates, routes. And why didn't you report it when you had enough evidence? Margaret stood up and went to a small chest on the table. Because we discovered that the network had connections at high levels of multiple governments. We didn't know who to trust. Then my husband died. A sudden heart attack during a diplomatic meeting. Her voice broke. Officially, it was his heart. But I've always wondered. Just before he died, he had said he was ready to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Eleanor was afraid after that. Margaret continued, afraid that the same thing would happen to her, but not afraid for herself, but afraid of leaving you alone, Emily. So she gave me this. She opened the chest and made me promise that I would only give it to you when you were strong enough, when the world was ready to listen to you. From the chest, she took out a small external hard drive and a thick envelope. Here's everything. Audio recordings of diplomatic meetings where these operations were discussed, photographs, original documents, and most importantly, testimonies from victims. Eleanor met and secretly helped for years. Emily took the drive with trembling hands. It was small, but it contained the weight of entire lives. Is there anything else? Margaret added softly. The box in Geneva contains the documentary evidence. But this, she pointed to the drive, contains the voices, the real stories of people who were silenced. Eleanor recorded them with permission in their own languages. She knew you would be the one to finally translate them, to give them a voice to the world. That night, Emily barely slept. With headphones on, she listened hour after hour to the recordings. Voices in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Russian, in languages she knew intimately. Stories of separated families, of broken promises, of destroyed hopes. And in each recording, at the end, was her grandmother's voice, her maternal warning, promising that their stories would be told. When dawn broke, Emily had dry tears on her cheeks, but renewed fire in her soul. The flight to Geneva departed the next day. Emily traveled with Sarah, Brenda, who had been released as promised, Thompson, and a security escort coordinated by Agent Carter. The RCMP had discovered that Richard Thorne, the third client, was actually a private security operative, hired to discredit Emily before she became a public voice. He was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Geneva greeted them with gray skies but with promises of justice. The Helvetia International Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, designed to protect secrets for generations. In a private room with a Swiss notary present, Emily opened safety deposit box number 4721. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting, with names, dates, locations. But what most impacted Emily was finding at the bottom of the box a photo album, photos of herself through the years, her first day of school, learning to write in Arabic, reading books in French. Each photo had a note from her grandmother on the back. The last photo was of Emily at 16, smiling while holding a certificate from an online translation course. The note said, "The day I knew you were ready, it just remained for the world to be ready too." Emily hugged the album to her chest, sobbing. Sarah hugged her, then Brenda, then everyone present. It was a moment of pain and love, intertwined so deeply that there were no words in any language to adequately describe it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emily, with the help of Sarah and an international legal team, presented all the evidence to the International Court of Justice. The case caused an earthquake in diplomatic circles. 3 international networks were dismantled. 17 corrupt officials were arrested in 6 different countries. But more important than the arrests was what Emily did with the recordings. She created a documentary titled Voices of Silence. In it, she personally translated each testimony, giving voice to those who had been silenced. She not only translated words but captured emotions, cultural contexts, the essential humanity of each story. The documentary went globally viral. More than 100 million views in the first week. Governments were forced to respond. Policies changed. Lives were saved. Ambassador David Lamb from the United Nations personally contacted Emily. "Miss Davies, Your work has exposed injustices that governments ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to offer you a position as Special Human Rights Translator. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear. Emily accepted, but with one condition: that the position include a program to identify and train other young talents without formal credentials. True talent, she argued, should not need institutional validation to be recognized. Her proposal was unanimously accepted. 6 months later, Emily stood in the same courtroom where she had once been humiliated. But this time she was not an accused, but an invited speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice. Judge Evelyn Carter was present in the audience. She had retired early after her handling of Emily's case generated investigations into other cases where she might have allowed prejudices to affect her judgment. At the end of her speech, Carter approached her. "Miss Davies." Her voice was humble, so different from the arrogant woman she had been. "There is no apology sufficient for how I treated you, but I want you to know that your case changed my life. It forced me to confront prejudices I didn't even know I had. I am now working with the justice system to implement reforms that prevent other judges from making the same mistakes I made." "Judge Carter," Emily responded, "forgiveness does not erase the harm, but it opens paths towards something better. Your acknowledgement means more than your apologies, because it shows that people can change, learn, grow." They shook hands, and in that gesture there was healing, not only for them, but as a symbol of what the justice system could become. Brenda had rebuilt her life with Thompson's help. She now worked coordinating rehabilitation programs for unjustly incarcerated individuals. "You gave me hope when I had none," she told Emily. "Now I want to give that same hope to others." Sarah Jenkins received national recognition as Public Defender of the Year, but what she was most proud of were not the awards, but the letters she received from grateful clients, inspired by her passionate defense of Emily. Dr. Andrew Thompson resigned from his position after a university investigation confirmed multiple cases of plagiarism. His downfall served as a warning to other academics about the importance of integrity. David Wong, the engineer who had had the courage to confess first, established a foundation dedicated to supporting unconventional talents. "Emily taught me that honor is worth more than money or position," he explained in an interview. Chloe, the young woman from the detention center, who had risked her job to help Emily, received a full scholarship to study social work, sponsored by the program Emily had established. A year after the day Emily had been arrested, she stood in front of the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had traveled from Geneva specifically for this moment. She placed fresh flowers on the grave and knelt. "Grandmother," she spoke softly, "I finished what you started. The voices you helped protect are now being heard by the whole world. The networks you documented were dismantled. The people who tried to silence us failed." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees, as if nature itself were listening. "But more than that, Grandmother, I finally understood why you taught me all those languages. It wasn't just about words. It was about empathy, about connection, about understanding that every person, no matter their language or origin, has a story that deserves to be heard." Emily took the photo album from her bag, the one she had found in the safety deposit box. She opened it to the last page where she had pasted a new photo. It was of herself, standing in front of the United Nations, surrounded by people from all corners of the world, people whose stories she had translated, whose voices she had amplified. "Look, Grandmother, this is what we built together. Your sacrifice was not in vain. Your legacy lives on in every person who now has a voice thanks to what you taught me." As the sun set, Emily stayed there, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother had sown seeds of hope in the form of languages. Those seeds had grown into a garden of justice that would continue to flourish long after they were both gone. The next day, Emily gave her first class in the program she had created. 30 young people from diverse backgrounds, all with extraordinary talents, but without formal credentials, looked at her with hope and admiration. "My grandmother used to tell me," Emily began, "that talent doesn't need certificates to be real. It just needs opportunities to shine. You are here because each of you has a unique gift. My job is not to teach you, but to help you recognize the power you already have within." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Davies, how do we know we are good enough?" Emily smiled, remembering when she herself had asked that question. "Why are you here? Because you dared to try when the world told you you couldn't. That determination, that courage, is more valuable than any university degree." Months turned into years. Emily's program grew, expanding to 20 countries. Thousands of young talents found opportunities they otherwise would never have had. Some became translators, others cultural mediators, others human rights activists, but all shared something in common: the belief that true talent transcends credentials and that every voice, no matter how silenced it may have been, deserves to be heard. At a special ceremony at the United Nations, Emily received the International Human Rights Award. As she held the recognition, she thought of all the people who had made this moment possible. Her grandmother, who had sacrificed everything; Brenda, who had believed in her when she was at her lowest; Sarah, who had fought for her against all odds; Wang, who had found the courage to tell the truth. In her acceptance speech, Emily did not speak about her achievements. She spoke about her grandmother. Eleanor Davies never had a university degree. She never received official recognition for her work. But she understood something the world is just beginning to learn: that the value of a person is not measured in certificates, but in character. Not in credentials, but in courage. Her voice broke slightly with emotion. This award is not mine, it is hers. It is for every person who was ever underestimated, ignored, silenced. It is a reminder that extraordinary talent can come from ordinary places, and that sometimes the most powerful people are those the world never noticed. The ovation that followed lasted a full 5 minutes. People from all over the world, connected virtually, applauded not only Emily but all the Eleanors of the world. All the grandmothers, mothers, invisible workers who had planted seeds of hope without knowing if they would ever blossom. That night, Emily was in her apartment in Geneva, looking at the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Miss Davies, I'm Maria. I'm 16, and I live in a small village in Guatemala. I saw your documentary. I speak 5 languages that I learned from tourists who visited my village. Everyone tells me it's impossible for it to be true without formal education. But you gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I too can have a future. Can I apply to your program?" Emily smiled with tears in her eyes. "Of course you can, Maria. Tell me your story." And as she listened to Maria's story, Emily understood that this was her grandmother's true legacy. Not the dismantled networks or the awards received, but every individual life that was touched, every talent that was recognized, every voice that was finally heard. The cycle continued. Hope multiplied, and somewhere, Emily was sure, her grandmother Eleanor smiled. Because in the end, this was never a story about languages or injustice or trials. It was a story about love. Love of a grandmother who prepared her granddaughter to change the world. Love that transcended death, time, and circumstance. And that love, translated into 11 languages and 1,000 acts of courage, had illuminated the world.